The story opens with an idyllic yet quietly foreboding glimpse of a coastal fishing village where life moves in rhythm with the tides. The morning sun casts a golden glow over the weathered docks, where fishing nets hang like delicate webs, and the salty breeze carries the mingled scents of seaweed and diesel from the boats. The village is alive with routine, children scampering along the shore, wives mending nets, and old men smoking pipes as they recount tales of the sea. There's a sense of timelessness here, as though the village exists in its own little world, untouched by the chaos beyond the horizon. At the heart of this community is a tight-knit group of fishermen, led by a grizzled but respected captain, a man who has spent more of his life on the water than on land. His crew, a mix of young, eager men and seasoned sailors, joke and laugh as they load their boat with supplies for what should be just another routine trip. Among them is a rookie, perhaps a young man on his first major voyage, wide-eyed and nervous, but eager to prove himself. The older fishermen tease him good-naturedly, their laughter carrying across the docks. The families gather to see them off. Wives with wrapped lunches, mothers with whispered prayers, children waving excitedly at their fathers. There's warmth in these farewells, but also an unspoken tension. The sea, no matter how familiar, is never truly tamed. One fisherman's wife clutches her husband's hand a moment longer than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. A superstitious old woman mutters under her breath, making a warding sign against bad luck. The captain, sensing the unease, reassures them all with a confident grin. "We'll be back before sundown," he promises, though the sky, still clear, holds no hint of the storm to come. As the boat pulls away from the dock, the camera lingers on the shrinking figures of the villagers, their waving hands growing smaller until they blur into the shoreline. The last thing we hear is the cry of gulls and the rhythmic chug of the boat's engine before it fades into the vast open sea. The water is calm, almost too calm, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. And then, cut to black. The silence is deafening. This scene establishes a stark contrast between safety and danger, familiarity and the unknown. The peaceful, almost nostalgic depiction of village life makes the impending disappearance all the more tragic. The subtle hints, the wife's hesitation, the old woman's superstition, the rookie's nervous excitement, foreshadow disaster without outright stating it. By the time the boat vanishes into the horizon, the audience already feels the creeping dread of what's to come. The vast, unbroken expanse of the sea stretches in every direction, the boat now a solitary speck under an indifferent sky. The mood shifts subtly as the fishermen work, some casting nets, others repairing gear, their banter easy but quieter now, the shore no longer in sight. The rookie, still finding his sea legs, glances over his shoulder more than once, as if sensing something unseen. The captain stands at the helm, his face unreadable, eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced gaze of a man who knows the ocean's moods. Then, without warning, the radio crackles. A burst of static, a broken phrase from the Coast Guard about shifting weather patterns. The crew exchange glances but shrug it off. They've weathered worse. Yet as the afternoon wears on, the air grows heavy, the light taking on an odd, metallic hue. The water, once calm, begins to churn in slow, unnatural swells, though there is no wind. One of the older fishermen mutters something under his breath, fingers brushing against a charm hidden in his pocket. The rookie is the first to see it. A bank of fog rolling toward them, too fast, too thick. It swallows the horizon whole, a wall of white advancing like something alive. The captain barks orders, lights on, radio check, life vests ready, but his voice is swallowed by the sudden silence that descends as the fog envelops the boat. The world narrows to the deck, the men barely visible to one another, their breath misting in the unnatural chill. Then, the radio dies. Not with static this time, but with a final, hollow click, as if the sea itself has severed their last tether to the world. The rookie stumbles to the railing, peering into the fog, and for a moment, just a moment, he thinks he sees a shape in the mist, something darker moving against the white. He opens his mouth to shout, but the boat lurches violently, throwing him to the deck. The last thing he hears before the world goes black is the captain's voice, raw with something like fear, shouting a name, or maybe a warning, lost now to the sea. And then, nothing. This scene is a masterclass in mounting dread, where the ordinary becomes unnerving, and the natural world turns hostile without explanation. The fog is more than weather. It feels sentient, predatory. The radio's failure is the first true moment of isolation, the moment the fishermen realize they are no longer in control. The rookie's glimpse of something in the mist, whether real or imagined, plants the seed of the supernatural, leaving the audience questioning what exactly took them. By the scene's end, the boat is adrift in silence, the fate of the men unknown, and the mystery begins in earnest. Dawn breaks over the village with an uneasy stillness, the kind that follows a night of unanswered questions. The wives and children of the missing fishermen huddle near the docks, their eyes scanning the horizon where the sea meets a pale, indifferent sky. The boat was due back hours ago. By now, the usual sounds of mourning, the creak of ropes, the shouts of fishermen preparing their vessels, are replaced by hushed murmurs and the occasional choked-back sob. The absence is louder than any alarm. A child tugs at her mother's sleeve and asks when her father will return. The mother's lips press into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the little girl's hand, but she says nothing. Nearby, an old fisherman with salt-cracked boots and a face like worn leather stares out at the water, his silence heavier than words. He's seen this before, decades ago, men lost to the sea, swallowed without a trace. The village knows better than to voice their fears outright, but the dread is there, coiled tight in their chests. By mid-morning, the Coast Guard arrives, their uniforms crisp, their presence a grim formality. They take statements with practiced detachment, jotting down last known coordinates, weather conditions, the names of the missing. The villagers answer in monotone, as if reciting a script they never wanted to learn. A young officer, still new enough to believe in happy endings, promises they'll do everything they can. The older officers exchange glances. They've fished enough bodies from the water to know how this usually ends. Search boats cut through the waves, their spotlights sweeping the water long after the sun has set. Helicopters drone overhead, their rotors beating like a frantic pulse against the sky. But the ocean gives up nothing. No debris, no flares, no radio signals. Just an endless, mocking expanse of blue. Back in the village, a makeshift vigil forms near the shore. Candles flicker in glass jars, their flames trembling in the wind like the last breaths of hope. Someone starts singing an old hymn, the melody thin and wavering. Others join in, not because they believe it will bring their men home, but because silence would be worse. And then, just as the song fades, a single cry pierces the night. A woman points to the water, her hand shaking. For a heart-stopping moment, everyone sees it. A light, bobbing far out at sea. The crowd surges forward, voices rising in desperate prayer. But as quickly as it appeared, the light vanishes, swallowed by the dark. No one sleeps that night. This scene is a slow unraveling of hope, where the initial panic of disappearance gives way to the suffocating weight of uncertainty. The contrast between the villagers' raw grief and the clinical efficiency of the search teams underscores how tragedy becomes routine for those who deal in loss. The false alarm of the distant light is a cruel tease, a reminder that the sea is as capricious as it is vast. By the scene's end, the audience is left with the same gnawing question as the villagers. Are they gone, or are they still out there? The days stretch into a week with no sign of the missing fishermen, and the village begins to fracture under the weight of its own silence. The initial flurry of search parties and vigils has faded, replaced by a quiet, simmering tension. It is in this uneasy lull that the investigator arrives, not with the flashing lights of official vehicles, but quietly, almost unnoticed, like a shadow slipping between the cracks of the village's grief. The investigator, perhaps a journalist drawn by whispers of the unexplained, or a retired detective with a reputation for unraveling the unsolvable, steps onto the creaking wooden planks of the harbor and immediately feels the weight of eyes upon them. The villagers are polite but guarded, their answers clipped, their gazes sliding away too quickly. They offer the same rehearsed lines they gave the Coast Guard, but there is something beneath the words, something unspoken. That night, in the dim glow of a tavern lit by flickering lanterns, the investigator sits with the old fisherman from the docks, the one who had stared out at the sea with knowing dread. The man's voice is rough with age and whiskey as he leans in close, his breath carrying the salt of decades at sea. "This ain't the first time," he murmurs, his fingers tracing a watermark stain on the table like a map. "Men have vanished in these waters before, always the same way, clear skies, then the fog rolls in, and then gone." The investigator presses, and the old man's resolve cracks like thin ice. He speaks of a stretch of water the locals avoid, a place marked on no charts but etched into the superstitions of every fisherman who's sailed these seas. They call it the Maw, a patch of ocean that swallows ships whole. Some say it's cursed, others whisper of something worse lurking beneath the waves. But when the investigator asks for proof, the old man clams up, his face paling. "Ask the widow in the gray house," he finally mutters. "Her husband was the last to speak of it. Didn't do him no good." The next morning, the investigator finds the widow, a gaunt woman with hollow eyes, her home perched on the cliffs like a sentinel watching the sea. She doesn't invite them in, but she doesn't turn them away either. Inside, the house is a shrine to the lost. Yellowed newspaper clippings pinned to the walls, a dusty radio crackling with static, and on the mantel, a single photograph of a smiling man standing on the deck of a boat. "He knew," the widow says, her voice brittle. "He said the water there wasn't right, that it moved." Before the investigator can ask more, her hand shoots out, gripping their wrist with surprising strength. "Stop digging," she hisses, "or you'll end up like them." As the investigator steps back into the daylight, the village no longer feels sleepy. It feels watchful. A group of men loiter near the pier, their conversation dying as the investigator passes. One of them, a burly fisherman with a scar across his knuckles, meets their gaze a beat too long, his smile not reaching his eyes. The secrets here are not just buried, they're guarded. This scene shifts the narrative from passive grief to active pursuit of the truth, peeling back the layers of the village's carefully maintained normalcy to reveal the rot beneath. The old fisherman and the widow serve as gatekeepers to the past, their warnings laced with equal parts fear and guilt. The investigator's presence disrupts the village's fragile equilibrium, stirring up long-dormant dangers. By the scene's end, the audience is left questioning, is the sea the real threat, or is it the people who refuse to speak of what it hides? The tides bring secrets, but they rarely bring them gently. 3 days after the investigator's unsettling conversation with the widow, a storm rolls in, not the creeping, unnatural fog that took the fishermen, but a proper gale, the kind that lashes the shore with teeth of salt and wind. It is in the storm's aftermath, as the villagers pick through the debris washed up on the beach, broken planks, tattered nets, the occasional bottle bobbing in the shallows, that a boy shouts, his voice cutting through the morning mist. He's found something. The investigator arrives to see a crowd already gathered in a loose half-circle, their postures stiff with dread. On the sand lies a lifeboat, its paint blistered by salt and sun, its hull scraped raw as if something had dragged it across the ocean floor. But it's what's inside that stills the air, a body, curled fetal, its skin bleached white by the sea. One of the missing fishermen. The village doctor pushes forward, kneeling in the wet sand to examine the corpse. The crowd leans in, then recoils as one when the doctor turns the body over. The man's face is frozen in a rictus of terror, his lips peeled back from his teeth, his eyes wide and clouded. But it's his hands that draw gasps. They're locked in a death grip around a rusted metal box, his fingers fused to it by rigor mortis. The doctor pries it loose with a sickening crack. Inside the box, a waterlogged notebook, its pages warped but still legible. The investigator takes it, peeling apart the sheets with careful fingers. The entries start normally, weather notes, coordinates, the mundane chatter of men at sea. Then, abruptly, the handwriting changes. It becomes jagged, frantic, the pencil strokes digging into the paper. Day 4. The fog won't lift. The radio's dead. Captain says we're not where we should be. The stars are wrong. Day 5. We heard knocking on the hull last night. No land for miles. No ships. What's knocking? The final entry is a single sentence, scrawled across 2 pages like a scream. They're in the water. As the investigator looks up, the widow's warning echoes in their mind. Behind them, the scarred fisherman from the pier pushes through the crowd, his face dark. That's enough, he growls, snatching the notebook. This ain't for outsiders. The villagers murmur, some nodding, others shrinking back. The investigator watches as the man storms off, the notebook tucked under his arm like stolen evidence. But not before noticing the symbol etched into the box's lid, the same one from the widow's clippings, the same one, perhaps, that marks the door of the gray house. The sea didn't just take the fisherman, it sent one back with a message. This scene is the story's turning point, where the supernatural hints solidify into something undeniable. The lifeboat's arrival is a grotesque parody of hope. The villagers prayed for a sign, and the sea gave them a horror. The notebook's entries escalate the mystery, while grounding it in the visceral, the corpse's terror, the unnatural knocking, making the threat feel real. The fisherman's theft of the notebook introduces a human antagonist, suggesting the village's secrets are worth killing for. By the scene's end, the investigator and the audience know 2 things. The fisherman didn't just disappear, and someone doesn't want the truth found. The village holds its breath. The stolen notebook burns in the investigator's mind like a fever. They know now, that whatever took the fisherman wasn't just the sea. It was something older, something hungry. But the scarred fisherman's defiance, the way the villagers averted their eyes when the notebook was ripped away, that was human, and humans can be cornered. The investigator waits until nightfall, when the wind carries the sound of the waves far enough to muffle footsteps. The gray house looms ahead, its windows dark. The widow's warning echoes, but the metal box's symbol is still etched behind their eyelids, and they need answers. The door is unlocked. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of salt and candle wax. The clippings on the wall aren't just about missing fishermen, they're about sacrifices. A floorboard creaks. The widow stands in the doorway, her face gaunt in the moonlight. She doesn't seem surprised. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispers. But she doesn't stop them when they reach for the largest clipping, a century-old report of a ship found adrift, its crew vanished, its deck stained with a substance no one could identify. At the bottom, a single phrase: "The maw demands its due." Then outside, the sound of boots on gravel. The scarred fisherman and his friends, their faces shadowed by lantern light. "Told you to let it lie," he snarls. The investigator backs toward the fireplace, fingers brushing against the iron poker, but the widow steps between them. "Enough," she says, and for the first time, her voice doesn't shake. "They've seen. They know." A beat of silence. Then the scarred fisherman laughs, low and bitter. "Fine, let them see what happens to those who don't pay." He grabs the investigator's arm, dragging them toward the cliffs. The villagers follow, a silent procession. Below, the waves crash against jagged rocks, but beyond them, just past the breakers, the water is still. Too still. A perfect circle of calm. The maw. The scarred fisherman shoves an old rope into the investigator's hands. Its end is tied into the same symbol. "Throw it in," he orders. When the investigator hesitates, he sneers. "Or join them." The rope hits the water. For a moment, nothing. Then the sea parts. Something rises from the depths, not a wave, not a beast. Something worse, something knowing. The investigator staggers back, but the villagers don't. They're kneeling. The truth isn't just that the sea takes, it's that the village lets it. This scene shatters any pretense of ambiguity. The horror isn't just supernatural, it's collaborative. The villagers' complicity, their rituals, their silence, is the real revelation, turning the story from a mystery into a confrontation with primal, sanctioned evil. The maw's reveal is visceral, but deliberately unclear. Is it a god? A monster? The ambiguity makes it scarier, and the investigator's role shifts from outsider to witness, or perhaps next offering. Dawn comes, but it brings no comfort. The investigator stumbles back into the village as the first pale light bleeds over the horizon, their clothes stiff with salt and their hands still shaking. The maw has sunk back beneath the waves, taking its grotesque tribute with it. But the weight of what they witnessed hangs in the air like the stench of rotting seaweed. The villagers move through the streets with hollow eyes, avoiding the investigator's gaze. Last night's fervor has cooled into something quieter, something shameful. They know what they are, what they've done. The widow is waiting on her porch, her shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. She doesn't speak as the investigator approaches, but her silence is answer enough. "You see now," it says. "This is how we survive." The investigator's voice is raw when they finally break the silence. "How long?" The widow's answer is a whisper. "Generations." She tells them then, not just of the fishermen lost to the maw, but of the ones chosen, the storms that never touch the village, the nets that always come back full, the price paid in blood and silence. "It's not evil," she murmurs, though her knuckles are white where they grip her shawl. "It's just hungry, and hunger must be fed." The investigator thinks of the notebook's final words, "They're in the water," and understands, suddenly, what the village has truly lost. Not just men, their humanity. By midday, the scarred fisherman and his friends have gathered at the docks, their faces set in grim resolve. They don't stop the investigator from leaving, but their message is clear. Go. Never speak of this, or next time, the rope will be around your neck. The investigator takes one last look at the sea, calm, endless, hiding its secrets beneath a glittering mask, and turns away. But in their pocket, the widow's parting gift weighs heavy. A single page, torn from her husband's journal, coordinates, a map to the maw, and a name written over and over like a prayer, Lightkeeper. This scene is a quiet devastation, where revelation gives way to resignation. The villagers' complicity is laid bare, but so is their tragedy. They're not monsters, just people who've made a monstrous choice to survive. The investigator's forced exile underscores the cost of truth in a world built on lies. And that final clue, the page, the name, dangles a thread of unresolved mystery, hinting that the horror isn't over. It's just waiting. The investigator's car winds its way up the coastal road, leaving the village behind in the rearview mirror. The sky hangs low and heavy, the scent of salt and impending rain seeping through the cracked windows. The page with the coordinates burns in their pocket, the word Lightkeeper gnawing at the edges of their mind like a riddle they can't solve. But they don't go home. Instead, they follow the road north, where crumbling lighthouses dot the cliffs like sentinels of a forgotten age. The one they seek is the oldest, its paint peeled away by decades of wind, its lantern dark. The gate creaks open with a groan, and the investigator steps inside, their footsteps echoing in the hollow tower. Dust swirls in the thin light as they climb, their fingers brushing against names carved into the stone, some weathered smooth by time, others fresh enough to still bleed sap. At the top, the investigator finds a single room, a desk, a chair, and on the wall, a map, not of the coast, but of the maw, its edges marked with the same symbol from the box, the widow's clippings, the rope. And then, a voice from the shadows. You weren't supposed to come here. The figure that steps forward is gaunt, their eyes sunken but sharp. The Lightkeeper. Their hands are stained with ink and salt, their nails cracked from years of etching names into the lighthouse's walls. The investigator starts to speak, but the Lightkeeper raises a hand. You've seen what the village does, they say, but you don't know why. They move to the window, where the sea stretches out, endless and indifferent. The maw isn't just hungry, it's waiting. For what, I don't know. But the village, they're not feeding it to survive. They're feeding it to keep it sleeping. A pause. The wind howls through the broken glass, and it's starting to wake up. The investigator turns to the map again, and this time, they see it. The marks aren't just locations, they're dates, and the most recent one is today. Somewhere, far below the cliffs, the sea begins to stir. This final scene transforms the story from a local horror into something cosmic and unresolved. The Lightkeeper's revelation reframes everything. The village's sacrifices weren't just tradition, but a desperate holding action against something far worse. The investigator's journey doesn't end with answers. It ends with a deepening of the mystery, leaving the audience and the protagonist with the chilling realization that some horrors are too vast to comprehend, let alone stop. The final image, the sea stirring as the date aligns, implies an inevitable, impending doom. The maw isn't just a threat, it's a force beyond human understanding, and its awakening is now a ticking clock. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.